morning. As we take a look at our new theme for this year, the fruits of the Spirit from Galatians, we're going to start this particular series in a different spot. We're going to be in John chapter 15. So if you want to turn there, go ahead and do that. And I think that one of the things for me, when I take a look at these lessons and parables and all of this, I think that oftentimes I have heard people say, well, we're not as agrarian as we used to be, so, maybe Jesus would have used different metaphors and different ways of talking and different ways of making connections, writing those parables, making sure that we understand the meaning of what is going on. But my problem when I read passages like this is that I'm too much of a gardener. And so I take a look at these passages and I start getting excited about the metaphor, and sometimes I'm afraid I'm going to run with it. But as I think about that, I think about when people were hearing these parables, when they were hearing these images, this imagery here, I think that they did that. I think that when they were thinking about how these passages applied to them and what Jesus was actually saying, as they were going through this and they were thinking about these things, they had to be thinking about, I understand where he's going, and I understand that this is going on, and I think that this might be some application that I can apply to my life and all that. So that when we're taking a look at these particular lessons, or when we're taking a look at parables, I think it is okay for us to take a look at this and say, well, what are Jesus' words saying to me, and how I can apply those to my life? We're going to take a look at John chapter 15, and I want us to read verses 1 through 17. I'm just going to read that right here, and then we'll go on with the lesson. But Jesus, it's one of those I am passages, and it says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he trims clean, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be given you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one laid down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you to go and bear fruit that will last. Then the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. This is my command: love each other. And as I take a look at these passages and think about what Jesus is saying here, the garden imagery is clear to me. And as I take a look at what is going on in this particular thing, I just want to make sure that I'm on the right section. I can think that there are fruitless branches, and I think that what we see on this, when we think about fruitless branches, what Jesus is really saying here is that a fruitless life is to be spiritually dead. That is the parallel here. That is absolutely the lesson that he wants to make sure that we understand. If we are not bearing fruit, then we are spiritually dead. We are spiritually dead branches. And I take a look at this and I think about my own fruit trees, and I think about the pruning that I do. I remember several years ago, my wife and I put out an orchard, and we kind of went a little bit overboard, and we've taken out some of the trees since then. And I remember talking with Jim Bailey one time, and he said, fruit trees, boy, they're a lot of work. Yeah, they are. They are an awful lot of work. And so when I see what Jesus is saying is the true vine, my Father is a gardener, and I think about the care that God puts into it, I think about some of the things that we have dealt with and some of the things that we have seen with it. And sometimes a branch can look incredibly alive, but sometimes it is so wild with vigor. but it is not tied to God's purposes. And I think of the trees that we have, and what we call those branches that just kind of shoot up, and they shoot up really fast, and they're quick, and they grow a lot over the summertime, and they grow through the growing season, but they never produce fruit. We call them suckers. And they're suckers because they suck the life out of the tree, but they don't do anything that has to do with actually the tree's purpose. They don't give any fruit. They don't do anything. They don't produce anything. They just grow up quickly, and that's all that they do. But I also think of branches that may have died on the vine by not really deriving their sustenance for it. And when you take a look at a tree or you take a look at a vine and you see that, you can't always tell why in the world the branch died. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it just withers up and dies, and you take a look at it and you think, well, I can't really see anything wrong with it. There's really no reason why it should have died. But we understand from verse 2 that what happens that God cuts off every branch in Jesus that does not bear fruit. Both branches, both types are cut off. Maybe it was disease. Maybe there was a situation in which it was not getting the proper sustenance from the actual vine. And I think about these things, and I think about how we can take a look at both of these. The one that is wildly enthusiastic, the one that grows, the one that seems to be green and verdant and all that kind of stuff. And I think about what Jesus is trying to say here. And there are a lot of people who may seem like there is some kind of semblance in spirituality to them. They seem to be doing incredible things. And you take a look at them and they have the language of Christianity, for example. And they're going and they're doing incredible things. And maybe it's in an area of their work life or an area of whatever it is. But if they're not bearing fruit for Jesus Christ, then it really isn't serving its purpose, no matter how good it looks, no matter what it is doing. And so God cuts it off. And he says, it's not part of what I am doing. I think of two, in this other situation, branches that die on the vine by not deriving their sustenance from it. Again, you can't always tell what is going on. But just because we meet together, just because we are involved in spiritual things, does not mean that we are actually getting our true sustenance from Jesus. There's another third situation here that Jesus alludes to in verse 6. He talks about, if anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. I'm not exactly sure of what situation would occur in which a branch would just decide to fall off. And we've got to understand something about Jesus' parables. We've got to understand something about his imagery. Not everything is just a clear-cut reason. Not everything is always clear-cut. Sometimes Jesus takes a metaphor and he runs with it, and then he gets off the metaphor. We can't understand why a branch would just choose to fall off and wither and die. But we understand something about our own selves. We can choose to fall off, wither, and die. It's interesting. I was pruning a pear tree a couple of years ago, and my wife said, "Oh, don't throw away the branches because I need them for stakes in the garden." She wants to keep a netting over certain sections of the garden so that they're nice and insulated over the wintertime. And we stuck those pear branches into the ground. And in the spring, something unusual happened. Those pear branches started to leaf out. I got excited. New pear trees. I don't know what I'm going to do with all those pear trees, but I was going to have lots of pears. I'm not sure where I was going to put them, but I saw pears. And so I looked, and Zlaka said, "Well, it's time for us to take these branches out." And I said, "Well, hold on, let me see if there's some roots on them." No, there was no root in them. And we kept some in the ground. And I said, "Well, maybe if you keep it in the ground, it'll do something." It didn't do anything. The only thing it was good for was to put it on the burn pile and burn it a little bit later. And that's the reality of it. Branches that are not attached to the tree die. But in Jesus' story here, we actually can choose to remove ourselves from the vine. How unnatural is that? Quite. If we want to bear fruit, what we'll see is that fruiting properly takes training. As we take a look at what is going on about what the Father does, I want us to understand something clearly is in verse 2, he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he trims clean, so it will be even more fruitful. Sometimes I go out there and I start pruning the trees, and I start looking at it and I think, ooh, boy, that was brutal. That was difficult. I'm not sure necessarily that was the right cut. And sometimes my wife comes out and says, are we going to get any fruit from this after you're finished with it? And I say, yeah, I hope so. So anyway, sometimes it looks drastic. Sometimes it can be a little bit painful. But I know what I'm doing at this stage of the game, and so you prune. The Father is actively involved in making sure that we bear fruit. And this is something that we absolutely have to understand. He's not somebody who's just going to leave us to our own devices. God is a God who cares. And that is something that we must absolutely proclaim to this world, because some people take a look at God and they say, he has absolutely no involvement in this world. He doesn't care. But we can affirm clearly that the Father prunes and he cares. I think about passages. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of various kinds, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. That's from James chapter 1. And I think about that. The pruning process may not necessarily be something that we enjoy. Maybe it's not something that we completely understand entirely. But it is for our good. I love the fact that we have Bible classes again. And one of the things that I realized when we were having Bible classes before March 2020 is I would be sitting in Bible class and the teacher would be teaching, and all of a sudden I would see something and I go, ooh, that's good. I want to stick that in my sermon. Well, guess what? It happened this morning. And so I'm taking a look at this passage. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. What is God doing when he is pruning us? He's introducing discipline so that we can grow in the right way, so that we can move in the right way. It is a cleansing by the word, and we see this in chapter 15, 2 and 3. He cuts off every branch. Let me get it off of that. While every branch that does bear fruit, he trims clean so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. We got to understand that Jesus is talking to his disciples at the Last Supper right here. This is all in the context of the Last Supper, the 12. What he wants to say is, you are clean because of the word I have spoken to you. And as we take a look at this and think about what this means, is that the word is a cleansing mechanism for us. Folks, I've said it I don't know how many times, we need to be in the word. We need to make sure that we are reading our Bibles. We need to make sure that we are meditating on it. We need to make sure that we are thinking about it. When we are being cleansed by the word, then real growth can happen. If we are not being cleansed by the word, it's like a branch that is not even rooted to the tree. We're not getting the spiritual sap that we need, we might say. We're not getting the sustenance that we need. The cleansing by the word happens by Jesus' words to us and God's words to us in Scripture. There is a cleansing that happens. The other thing that I think that we see is when this happens, it directs the strength of the vine into the proper functioning of the branch. Again, when that pruning happens, when all this happens, we are able to function properly. We see that in verse 4, remain in me and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. We see all of this. We see that this is clear. We see in verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. And we see here that Jesus he's taking that metaphor and he's bringing it down to the practical nuts and bolts part of this. I have loved you. You need to remain in my love. You need to make sure that you are sticking through with your commitment to me. You need to make sure that you are loving me. If you're doing that, then you're allowing yourselves to be disciplined. If you're allowing that, then you're allowing yourselves to be cleansed. If you're allowing that, then you will produce fruit. The strength of the vine allows the branch to get the sustenance it needs. Our strength is in Jesus. We get that. The branch also needs to recognize the source of its own vigor. As we take a look at verses 7 and 8, it's kind of an unusual passage. It seems like, well, where in the world is Jesus going with this? But he talks about the one that does not remain in him, the branch that is thrown into the fire. But then in verse 7 it says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be given you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. And what we have here is that we, as the branches that are attached to the vine, recognize the source of our sustenance. And there's a situation here in which prayer is a very active part of this. Somehow, what is going on here is when we ask whatever we wish in Jesus' name, and we have been cleansed, and we have been pruned, and we have been purified, and we have been doing what we need to do, then God will allow us to do those things that we are designed to do. We recognize this. Yes, the metaphor kind of falls apart at this point. But I see it like this. We are a branch on the vine. And we say, I want to hold tighter. I want to hold tighter to this vine. I do not want to be cut off. I don't want to be cast aside. I don't want to lose my connection with the vine. So I'm going to hold on and I am going to pray. And I'm going to pray to be fruitful. And I'm going to pray that I can do what God wishes me to do. And I recognize that He will be able to do that through His strength. I can do that. We recognize the vine. The branch recognizes the source of its own vigor. I kind of get confused, don't I? Vine, branch, all this kind of stuff. Roots, leaves, trees, xylem, phloem, whatever. We recognize the source of our own vigor. But the other thing that I want us to see here, and I think that this is critically important, and I go through it over and again. We are all of one vine. And I think that this is something that we see when we take a look at these passages here. Keeping His commands keeps us on the vine. If we take a look at verse 10, what we have here is, well, we'll go back to verse 9 again. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in His love. And so we see this whole thing going on, but then we see what really His major command that He wants to give in this particular passage. We see in verse 12 and we see it in verse 17. I have told you this. I'm going back to 11. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that He laid down His life for His friends. And then we go to verse 17. This is my command, to love each other. We're going to be talking about these fruits of the Spirit. We're going to be talking about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We're going to talk about all of those things, but I got to make it clear. It is all in the context of one another. My command is that you love each other. Guess what? We cannot love each other unless we are involved in each other's lives. And I've talked about this time and again. The church is vitally important, and it's where God's love and justice and righteousness and holiness is made complete. If we are separate from that, we are separating ourselves from the vine. If we are separating ourselves from that, we are not bearing fruit. If we separate ourselves from that, we are running the risk of becoming spiritually dead. It is critically important that we are in each other's lives. And God had a plan for that. And it's the church. And so there are a couple of things. I want to encourage us to remain in Jesus Christ. But we cannot do that apart from the church. And so if you know people who have fallen away and they are no longer part of this body or whatever else, it is incumbent upon us to go out and reach out and say, hey, come back. Be a part of what's going on. If you're online today and you don't belong to a church, I know that we have some people who watch these sermons and watch our lessons and watch our worship services. And if you don't have a place to be, if you don't have a place to fulfill this command, to love one another, if you don't have a place where love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness among a body is possible, find a place. Be a part of the place. And of course, if you're nearby, do that here so that we can love and our joy can be complete. If you are not part of the vine, if you are not part of the body, it's a wonderful thing. Jesus gives everyone the opportunity to be part of the vine. Even those branches that have been cast off and burned, maybe in this life, still have the opportunity to come back to life and be part of the body. That is possible. I love the passage in Romans 11 where Paul uses the metaphor again of grafted branches, and he talks about the Gentiles that have been grafted on. And they've derived their sustenance, and they derive their meaning, and they derive their spiritual life from the vine that they have been grafted on. If you've decided that this is a day that you want to be part of the body, we welcome you and we encourage you to follow God's ways, follow his commands, become his child. We can make that happen. And if you have any questions about it and you're out there online and you need to call us, go ahead and do that as well. Please come as we stand and sing.